Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I am bringing you the best books that I've read in 2024. So I didn't do the freak out tag this year. I completely forgot to kind of do that tag. So I'm coming in here now to just tell you about the best books that I've read so far this year. These are mixed genres. I've had such a diverse reading year so far. The first 6 months of the year, I've got a number of 5-star reads. Some of these are 5 stars, some of them are 4. Majority of them are 4 stars. The 5 stars are reserved for the ultimate, the peak books that either changed me, made me emotional, or just had some kind of effect on me. Yeah, those books are quite rare, but I will let you know which ones are 5 stars from this list. And I do think these are all worth your time checking out. Of course, they are best books from me, but also you could use this as a recommendation as well, because all of these books are incredible. And if you haven't read them yet, I highly suggest picking them up. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first book on this list is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. I read this as part of my booktuber video project where I read booktubers' favourite horror books, and this one was the most popular on there, and it was sat on my shelves. I just hadn't gone around to picking it up, but so glad that I did for that video, because this did become a 5-star read for me. I loved all of this story. I love Alexis Henderson's writing style. It's just something that I can connect with. The plot behind her books are just incredible. They are women-centric, and I feel like that is something that I really enjoy to read about. So House of Hunger follows this girl who comes from a lesser off background in a world where there are these elites who have blood maids, and it is kind of seen as a frowned upon activity to become a blood maid, but it does pay well and you do kind of get to live a different type of lifestyle. Our main character Marion finds an ad for becoming a blood maid in the House of Hunger, and we kind of follow her story development from that, and it's quite an interesting story. It follows obsession, vampire lore. It also has themes of female empowerment. It does have some sapphic elements in here. It's brutal and set up kind of like a fever dream sort of story. But I loved every second of reading this book. It was an incredible read, so intense. The writing kind of never stopped giving. There was no point in this book where I was getting bored. There was always something happening or some development happening. So this book was an incredible read. Loved every second of reading this, and yeah, was a 5-star read for me. The next book I have on here isn't a horror book, it is a sci-fi book, and that is Sector 47. So I read this book being part of the Insta Book Tour campaign for Sector 47. Unfortunately, the author has just recently passed away. He worked so hard on it, and you can really tell the passion that went into the story. So my thoughts are with his family and everyone who's been affected by his passing. So it is really sad that he has now passed away, but nevertheless, all we can do now is shout about his work and keep it living on in his memory. So Sector 47 is a book that is centered around this girl and her robot friend. She is a bounty hunter and is jumping through planets, trying to find a medallion that could help save her planet, her home planet, where her uncle is still residing. And so this takes us on an adventure through the galaxy whilst you're learning and developing your knowledge around Sector 47 and what exactly went down on this planet that made Sadia have to leave. So this book was an incredible sci-fi story. To me, it was giving vibes of The Mandalorian. This does deal with a lot of brutal topics and violence and all of that stuff. It deals with colonialism and like racism in obviously galaxies. So it is an interesting book to read. It's quite a surprise because sci-fi usually never makes it onto these lists for me. But this one was definitely a standout and something I would highly recommend checking out. Even if you're not into sci-fi all that much, this is definitely a book that can be an introduction into the sci-fi world because it's not so intense on the sci-fi elements. There is a lot of other theming throughout that kind of makes it easier to digest the whole sci-fi elements in the story. So that is Sector 47. Do check this out if you haven't even heard of it yet. It is such a fun book. The next book on the list is Impossible Creatures by Catherine Rundle. This was a book, the very first book that I read in 2024, and it was an instant 5-star read. This book had me sobbing. I was crying my eyes out at this. It was such a surprise when I was reading it. It's such a fun, emotional, like fantasy story. So this follows our main character, a little boy who finds a baby griffin and is then thrust into the magical world, this secret land of archipelagos. In this realm of the secret islands live all of our mythological and folkloric creatures, and they have to go on a quest to save this magical land. So this is such a fun, heartwarming, soul-crushing story that had me so emotional. The cover keeps sliding out. Okay. I loved every second of reading this book. It is like a YA story, I guess, but it is a fantastical adventure that you go on, and I feel like I need to reread this at some point. But this was a 5-star read, the very first book that I read in 2024, and it was such a surprise of how much I actually loved this book. So yeah, that is Impossible Creatures. Next up is a shift towards horror, and that is Tender is the Flesh. This story, again, I read for a vlog, so I will leave all of the vlogs where I discuss these books down in the description or in the cards. But Tender is the Flesh was kind of a surprise for me. I loved this. This is a book that is focused on the commentary around farming of animals, but centered around, in this world, human farming. So animals have become practically impossible to eat. They are disease ridden. You can't consume animals. And so in this dystopian, we follow the farming of humans and how they are bred to just be eaten as food. It is kind of symbolic to how the animal agriculture is and how that production is kind of seen in today's light as well. So as a vegetarian, I was vegan. This book had so much realism in it in terms of the treatment of humans in this book against how humans treat animals in today's society. So I really loved how they took that and twisted it into this dystopia. It is a horrendous and bleak version of the world and our view on how we get protein and meat. But it is such a beautiful writing. Like, it's written in such a monotoned style that it doesn't seem like this book would be interesting to read. But I thoroughly ate this one up. It was such an enjoyment to read whilst being bleak and horrible. Like, the ending is so bizarre and terrible, but that made me love it. So this book will take a hold of you if you do read it. It is such a interesting story to delve into, especially the thematic elements and concepts. If you, like myself, take what is said in this and apply it to our real world and how we actually do treat our own animals in production, you do see a lot of unfortunate similarities there. But it is an incredible book. Loved reading it. It was so bleak, and I can see why other people do love this one as well. Next up, we have The Hellborn Heart by Clive Barker. This one has my heart. I adore this book so much. This one is so short, but I read it for the first time this year, and I have no idea why it's taken me this long to read it. I did a whole video for this book telling you my thoughts and opinions on The Hellborn Heart versus Hellraiser, because Hellraiser is one of my favourite horror movies of all time. So I wanted to read the original source, and boy, I am ashamed that I waited this long. Hellraiser follows this book really closely. There are some minor changes, but overall, The Hellborn Heart was an incredible story. The disgusting, visceral descriptions in this book had me so hooked. I adored reading this so much. So really loved this. This was such a fun time, and I highly recommend it to a lot of other people too. Next up, we have The Pale House Devil by Richard Cadray. This is a more recent read for me. This was so much fun. This book is so entertaining. I really ate this one up. It is a short novella, literally like just over 100 pages. And we follow a pair of PIs, and they are kind of employed to get rid of an entity in Pale House, and shit hits the fan, essentially. I'm not going to give too much away because this was so good. The banter between these two characters was just so good. The writing and how these characters develop throughout the story in such a short amount of time was just incredible. And I said in my other vlog when I read this that I need Richard to write more in this world, focusing on these characters. I just need a full-length novel because this was incredible. Next up, we have The Troop. This book was kind of a shock. It's not a 5-star read. I did give it a 4, simply because the start of this book was so slow, and I didn't really get into it until like a third of the way in. But I did enjoy it. It was so gross. For me, I adore body horror, and The Troop is literally the definition of body horror. Essentially, we follow this scout troop who are on an island doing a survival-based training type of camp, and they stumble upon this person who doesn't seem normal, and so they are also cut off from the mainland, being on this island. So they are forced to encounter and face such unsettling scenes. And so we get this described to us throughout this book. It's intense, it's gross, it's dark, and it is such a fun time. Next up, we have Whalefall by Daniel Carruth. This one I seen on Book Talk last year, and I just knew I had to read this. This book kind of follows my fears. I have thalassophobia, so anything with water just creeps me the hell out, and that's what this book did. We follow a man who is overcome by grief and sets out on a dive to find his father's remains, and we learn that he gets swallowed by a whale and only has so much oxygen left to survive. And each chapter you get told how much PSI left he has And so, as somebody who is terrified of that, that had me stressed the F out the entire time reading this book. It was so intense, scary, and also very enjoyable. This was heartwarming as well. So, like, so many themes of grief and loss and fear was in this story, and it is such a fun read. It does seem long, but I got through this in like 2 days. So, highly recommend checking this book out. It was so incredible, and I had a fun time reading it, despite being scared the entire time. Next up, we have a romantasy, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. I didn't think this would be a book I enjoyed, but I'm obsessed. I'm currently reading the third and the last book in this trilogy because this one kind of changed the game for me. As someone who doesn't read romance or enjoys romantasy or anything like that, wasn't sure I would enjoy this. But somehow this connected with me, and yeah, just loved every second of reading it. Essentially, we're following Evangeline, who makes a deal with the fate to change the course of her lover's journey. And she kind of gets mixed up in the wrong sort of life and ends up trusting a fate. But you should never make a deal with a fate, because things just change and her life takes a swift turn, and we follow her journey from there. So this one had like a fairy tale-esque style for me. I enjoyed reading it because it seemed like a fairy tale. Next up, we have the last October Society book, season 3. This one, if you don't know already, I'm obsessed with the October Society series. These books have such a hold in me. I loved all of them. They follow a group of children who have to sit around a campfire telling haunted stories in the eve of Halloween. They share a range of different short stories in each of the 6 episodes. So it is so, like I said, nostalgic, but it has such a heartwarming theme throughout. And so it's a beautiful message to all of us who are obsessed with Halloween to never forget that Halloween is in our hearts and to never be scared of the dark. So the way this series was rounded out was incredible, and it's why I'm including this book in this list. So if you haven't read The October Society, I highly recommend picking it up. Next up, we have The Nesting by C.J. Cook. This book is just a bit of me. It is a Nordic thriller, so it's a horror set in the wintertime, in a isolated and chilling setting. So that's definitely me. So we're following this girl who becomes a nanny for these children, gets shipped out to Norway whilst the family are building a new house, and kind of weird stuff starts happening to the family, and the babysitter is thrust into the drama of it all. This story was so much fun. It has themes of not just like family drama, but also nature's revenge and why we need to protect it rather than destroying it. So yeah, this book, without spoiling too much, was such an incredible read. 5-star book. The writing style kept me hooked, and CJ Cook is definitely one of my favorite authors now because I adore all of her writing. And yeah, this one is definitely something that I think everybody needs to read. And finally, we have My Throat an Open Grave by Toy Bovolino. This is a new one that I've just finished reading. I love this. 5-star instantly. The writing is so fantastical, but yet haunting at the same time. Who lives in this small town that is very religious, and she kind of loses her brother and is sent off by the town to find him, and she is then taken by the Lord of the Wood, and her story develops throughout from that point. It's very sinister, and to me, it was just beautiful. Was so good. There is dark topics mentioned in this book, and the twist really got me. Like, wow, was not expecting that coming. But yeah, I'm not going to spoil it too much because I think everybody needs to explore this book themselves. And yeah, I just loved every second of reading it. Instantly a 5-star book, and I was so happy that I was able to get it personalized as well when I met Tori at a book festival recently. So with that, I'm going to end this video. Hopefully you have enjoyed learning about what my favorite books are from this year so far. This might change. I may be adding to this list, but those are all my 4 and 5-star reads from 2024 so far. Let me know in the comments if you've read any. What's your favorite book of the year so far? I would love to know. And I guess until next time, keep your pages turning and embrace the darkness. Bye!